Have you ever felt like simply walking down a perfectly normal street is just somehow it's an agonizingly awkward experience?
Oh, absolutely. Like
Okay.
you suddenly forget how your arms work.
Yes. You're just,
Yeah.
putting one foot in front of the other, but suddenly you are intensely aware of your own arms. You don't know where to look. You feel incredibly stiff.
Right.
And the second you hit a crowd, what do? I mean, you reach for your phone, you unlock it, and you start furiously scrolling through like absolutely nothing, purely to look busy.
Yeah, it is. It's the ultimate modern shield, right?
Yeah.
You are staring at a completely blank home screen, terrified that someone will realize you're actually doing nothing, that you're just existing in space.
Exactly. So today we are unpacking some fascinating material that dives deep into the exhausting weight of that exact feeling.
Yeah, it's a really common thing.
It is. We are looking at the mechanics of social anxiety and this excessive self-focus. Our mission for this deep dive is to understand why our brains convince us we are constantly under a microscope.
Right. And how that fear forces us to isolate ourselves.
Exactly. And most importantly, we are going to break down the actual neurological tools required to break free from that cycle.
Which is so important because, we often dismiss these feelings as just being shy or having a brief moment of overthinking, but the psychological toll is massive.
It really is draining.
It is. Walking around feeling like a target drains your cognitive battery so fast. So today is really about combining the hard truth of where these insecurities originate with a genuine science-backed blueprint for reclaiming your mental space.
I love that. Reclaiming your mental space. Let's start with the everyday symptoms, because the material we're looking at brings up examples that hit incredibly close to home.
Oh, for sure.
Like, this isn't just about the classic fear of public speaking, it's the mundane stuff. Feeling physically stiff and unnatural when you're literally just sitting in a chair getting a haircut.
Oh man, the haircut panic is real.
Right. Or being terrified to raise your hand in a totally casual meeting, or even just feeling weirdly paralyzed to stand up and go to the bathroom in a crowded restaurant.
Yeah, it's the paralysis of the mundane. And the research points out how this infiltrates our recreation too. Like, think about avoiding multiplayer video games.
Yeah, wow, yeah.
You aren't avoiding the game because it's not fun. You are avoiding the sheer terror of making a mistake and having your own teammates turn on you.
That urge to flee when you're around peers is so incredibly strong. I mean, you'd think the human instinct would be to connect, but the immediate reflex is to escape the situation before anyone can notice a flaw.
Exactly. Or before they can talk behind your back.
Right. And if you try to explain this to someone who doesn't experience it, they usually give you the most unhelpful advice imaginable. They're like, why are you worried? No one is even looking at you.
Which is, technically true, but practically useless.
Totally useless.
Yeah, because logically, the entire coffee shop isn't scrutinizing your posture, but your brain completely bypasses that logic. It just magnifies every stray glance.
Oh, yeah. If someone across the room laughs...
Your brain immediately decides they're laughing at you. You construct these elaborate worst-case scenarios before you've even stood up from your chair.
It feels like being trapped in a theater where you are absolutely convinced you are on stage under a blinding spotlight, but in reality, you're just sitting in the dark audience with everyone else.
Right, which psychologists actually call the spotlight effect.
The spotlight effect, exactly, where we just dramatically overestimate how much other people are noticing our behavior and our appearance.
Yeah, but knowing the term doesn't actually stop us from playing out a simple action, like, throwing away a napkin. You play it out a dozen times in your head before finding the courage to actually move.
So true. And so if we logically know we're in the audience and not on stage, we have to ask why our brain ignores that logic. Why does it force us into this hypervigilant state?
Right. And the source dives into the root causes here, because this isn't just a sudden personality quirk. It's not a conscious choice to overthink.
No, nobody chooses that.
Exactly. It's a deeply ingrained neurological pathway that gets built over a long period. And it almost always stems from early negative evaluations.
So like experiences from our formative years, middle school, that kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. Maybe it was a passing judgmental look from a middle school classmate or, someone explicitly mocking your appearance, your body, or your abilities.
Kids can be brutal.
They really can. And when you experience that early on, your brain takes notes.
So the brain essentially learns that being noticed equals being hurt.
Yes, your brain starts to perceive attention as a literal threat. like a physical danger. And to understand why you can't just talk yourself out of it, we have to look at the neurology.
Okay, let's get into the brain mechanics of this.
So the feeling of terror is originating in the amygdala, which acts like your brain's highly sensitive smoke detector.
A smoke detector.
Right. Its entire job is to keep you alive.
Yeah.
So when it senses attention, which, remember, it is learned as a threat, it immediately triggers a physical adrenaline response.
Wow. And that alarm bell completely bypasses the logical part of the brain, doesn't it?
Yeah, the prefrontal cortex. That's your rational manager.
Right.
But by the time your prefrontal cortex tries to step in and say, hey, we're just throwing away a napkin, we are safe, your amygdala has already flooded your system with stress hormones.
So you are basically reacting to a physical fire that simply doesn't exist.
Exactly. You are in full survival mode over a napkin.
It's a survival mechanism that has completely backfired. Because we view attention as danger, we are forced to constantly self-check.
Constantly.
We focus entirely on how our voice sounds, how we are standing, whether we're making too much or too little eye contact.
Which just makes you act weirder.
Right, instead of just doing the task. The irony is that in trying to protect ourselves, we make the experience agonizing.
Which leads right into the paradox of hiding that our deep dive highlights today. Because attention feels like danger, staying hidden feels safer in the moment.
Yeah, if you don't speak up in the meeting, you can't say something stupid.
Exactly. If you don't play the multiplayer game, you can't be the reason the team loses.
It feels like self-preservation, but the long-term consequence is that your world just gets smaller and smaller. You really box yourself in.
You do. You become your own harshest critic. You end up doing the bully's job for them, basically.
Wow, that's a heavy way to put it, but it's true. Doing the bully's job for them.
Yeah, you become so terrified of anyone seeing the genuine version of you that you present this heavily filtered, tightly controlled avatar to the world.
And maintaining that avatar takes an immense amount of cognitive energy.
It's exhausting.
Okay, so it makes sense why we'd hide in the present moment if our amygdala is screaming about a present danger. But what I want to know is, if the threat is gone, why does our brain suddenly ambush us when we're completely alone?
Oh, the midnight cringe attacks.
Yes. The material brings up those cringy memories from years ago. You know the ones. You're lying in bed, totally safe, and suddenly your brain replays an awkward conversation from, like, 2018.
Yep.
And it hits you so hard you physically wince. Why does that happen?
Well, it's essentially a phantom alarm. Your brain is a prediction engine.
A prediction, isn't
Right.
it?
It is scanning for threats, even when you're resting. And it pulls up past failures, quote unquote, as a warning to never do that again. It's trying to protect your future social standing by agonizing over past errors.
That is, I mean, it's fascinating, but it's also incredibly annoying.
Oh, deeply annoying. And once again, well-meaning people will tell you to just let it go. They say, oh, everyone has forgotten about that.
Which, again, doesn't actually help.
No, because that deep-rooted insecurity, that literal physical knot in your stomach, it doesn't respond to casual dismissals.
Because it's still that same amygdala response, right, just triggered by a memory instead of the physical environment.
Exactly. But the source poses a crucial reality check here for you to genuinely consider.
Yeah.
Think about your own life right now. Do you actually remember the awkward things that other people did 5 years ago?
I mean, no. I barely remember what my coworkers wore yesterday. I definitely don't have some mental archive of their embarrassing moments from 2018.
Right. And that is the liberating truth. You don't remember their awkward moments. They don't remember yours.
Yeah.
The text synthesizes this into the main character concept.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah, people are the main characters of their own stories. They are not the main characters of yours, and you are not a supporting character in theirs for them to scrutinize.
Right.
Everyone around you is far too busy dealing with their own insecurities, their own bills, their own relationships, to dedicate any mental bandwidth to your past awkwardness.
That concept actually takes a massive amount of pressure off. It's almost a relief to realize, like, nobody cares about you as much as you do.
Exactly.
But here is the catch, and the material acknowledges this beautifully. Knowing this logically doesn't make the physical panic vanish.
Yeah.
I can tell myself I'm not the main character of their story, but when I drop my keys in a quiet coffee shop, my heart still races. You can't debate your way out of a physiological anxiety response.
No, you really can't.
It requires active brain training to bridge that gap.
Because, again, logic is operating in that prefrontal cortex, but the terror is coming from the amygdala. You can't just tell an alarm bell to stop ringing. You have to actively show the brain that there is no fire.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? If telling ourselves no one cares isn't enough, how do we physically move through the world and break this cycle of rumination?
So the source provides a really practical method for this, shifting your focus outward.
Outward.
Yes. When that pressure hits, when the spotlight effect kicks in, you must consciously and deliberately look at the physical environment around you.
Okay.
Notice the architecture of the buildings. Look at the specific color of the sky. Direct your senses completely outward.
Wait, I have to stop you there. If my heart is racing and I feel like everyone in the cafe is staring at me, just looking at a brick wall or the color of the sky sounds a bit too simplistic.
Yeah, I get that.
Like, how does looking at a building actually stop a physical panic response?
It's a fair question, and it's not magic, it's neurology. This is a technique called grounding.
Grounding, okay.
When you are agonizing over your own awkwardness, your brain is caught in what neuroscientists call the default mode network.
Wait, the default mode network, what is that?
It's the network in the brain that is active when we're ruminating, self-reflecting, or worrying about the past and future.
Oh, so it's the overthinking network.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
And by actively forcing your brain to process external, neutral, sensory data, like the texture of a brick wall or the exact shade of blue in the sky, you physically interrupt that network.
Interesting.
You force your brain to switch to the task-positive network.
Oh, wow. So you're literally demanding that your brain's processing power be used for something else. You're starving the anxiety of the attention it needs to keep running.
Exactly. You are showing the amygdala that there is no immediate physical danger in the present moment.
Right.
By focusing on sensory details in your environment, you're grounding yourself in physical reality rather than the imagined threats of your internal world.
So you're taking the microphone away from your inner critic.
Yes, and handing it to your external senses.
That makes so much more sense. It's not about pretending the wall is fascinating. It's about forcing a mental gear shift.
Precisely.
And the text is really clear that you don't have to feel perfectly natural right away. Like, you might look at the sky and still feel that knot in your stomach.
Yeah, it takes time.
It's about tolerance, not immediate eradication. You just have to keep walking anyway, accept that you feel awkward and realize that it's completely fine.
Because you are building up a tolerance to the discomfort.
Right.
Through neuroplasticity, every time you shift your focus outward instead of spiraling inward, you weaken the pathway that equates attention with danger.
Wow.
And you strengthen the pathway that keeps you grounded. And to help manage this long term, our source introduces a powerful cognitive behavioral tool, the pyramid analogy.
Oh, yes. Let's dive into that, because this reframing is what really ties the daily practice to a bigger life philosophy.
It really does. So the idea is to visualize all the people you meet in your entire life as a giant pyramid.
Okay, a giant pyramid of people.
Right. The vast majority of people, the strangers on the street, the acquaintances at a party, the people you pass in the grocery store, they form the massive base and the wide edges of this pyramid.
The bottom layers.
Exactly.
Right.
They're just passing through. Their lives have entirely separate trajectories, and they will never truly intersect with yours in any meaningful way.
So why are we expending a massive amount of mental energy trying to perform for people who reside on the outermost edges of the pyramid?
We shouldn't be.
Right. We are agonizing over the opinions of people who have absolutely zero bearing on the actual quality of our lives.
It is a massive misallocation of resources. I mean, you only have a finite amount of emotional bandwidth each day.
Definitely.
The material distills this down to a really fundamental lesson. Out of all the thousands of people you interact with, only a very, very small number will ever truly be part of your life.
The tip of the pyramid.
Exactly. Those are the few people sitting right at the peak. Your close friends, your family, the people who actually know you and love you for who you are.
Those are the only ones worth your energy.
Exactly.
Like, why exhaust yourself trying to manage the perceptions of the bottom of the pyramid? They aren't looking, and honestly, even if they were, they don't matter to your story.
And that is exactly where the brain training and the philosophy meet. You use the outward focus to calm the amygdala in the moment, and you use the pyramid analogy to reallocate your mental energy in the long term.
This whole exploration of social anxiety really shifts how you look at, just a simple walk down the street.
It really changes your perspective.
It does. For everyone listening right now, the real takeaway is that this heavy self-focus isn't going to vanish overnight. You are untangling years of a defensive habit.
Right, it's a process.
But by taking it one step at a time, by actively using those grounding techniques to shift your focus outward, forcing your brain out of that rumination loop, you can slowly learn to stop watching yourself.
Yeah.
You can start actually living for yourself. Focus your precious cognitive energy on the top of your pyramid, and above all, be kind to the version of you that is trying to navigate this every single day.
I love that. And as you practice shifting that focus, I want to leave you with one final thought to just sort of mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
If it's true that everyone around you is entirely consumed with being the main character of their own story.
Which we know they are.
Right. If they are completely oblivious to your awkward moments because they are too busy agonizing over their own, doesn't that mean the world is actually an incredibly freeing place?
Oh, wow.
Because if no one is really watching that stage, you finally have permission to step out of the spotlight, sit back down, and just be exactly who you are.